Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of a review copy of Votes for Women, designed by Tory Brown and published by Fort Circle Games. This is Fort Circle Games' second published game, and I'm a big fan of their first game, The Shores of Tripoli, so I'm particularly excited to see what's in the box for this one. Now the goal of this game is to ratify the 19th Amendment, securing the right to vote for women in the United States. This is a 1 to 4 player game that plays in about an hour. It has a solitaire mode, a cooperative mode, and a competitive mode. So there's a lot of different ways to play. So let's get this one open, take a look what's inside, and offer some impressions. Couple of general observations as we start out. I love the artwork on the cover, from the choice of the font to the artwork. It's again very evocative of that historical feeling, 1848 to 1920 women's suffrage movement. It really feels like it pulls you into that time and that era and the issues that were there. It's just a really cool cover. Second thing I'd like to point out, and I think this was evident with the Shores of Tripoli as well, there have been no compromises made for quality of components. The box itself is really cool with beveled edges here, and just feels like it's been a lot of, when there's been a decision whether to cut costs or build quality into this, I feel like the choice has been made for quality at pretty much every, if not every, decision here too. So lots of quality evident in the production here too. So let's flip this over now and take a look at some of the general characteristics of the game. 1 to 4 players, and there's a lot of modes for this game. So you can play it solitaire, pro-suffrage, and with the opposition, the Oppobot, fighting against you. You can play it 2-player, and there's 2 ways to play it 2-player. You can either play both players playing cooperatively in the pro-suffrage movement, or you can play 1 player playing as the suffragist and 1 player playing as the opposition. You can go up to 3 players, in which case you can have 2 players playing pro-suffrage and 1 player playing opposition. And you can even go 4 players, where you've got 2 opposition players and 2 players playing for the pro-suffrage movement. So lots of different ways to play. I just speculating here. Again, I haven't played the game yet, so this is all speculation at this point. I get a sense that its strength is probably in that 1 to 3, although you could go to 4, but I feel like 1 to 3 seems like it's probably kind of its sweet spot in terms of number of players here. Time limit says 60 to 75 minutes, which feels about right. Kind of looking through the rule book a little bit here, it seems like it's going to be something that's going to take maybe an hour and a half or so to play. So not by any means, a game you could play a couple times in the evening or make it as part of a double header here. So as we look at this now, we've got a 2-inch box, some pretty good heft to this, a lot of stuff inside, as we shall see. And now it's time to take a look at what's inside. Here we have the rules. And one of the neat things about this now, because this is the second game from Fort Circle Games, I think we can start to look for patterns about what Fort Circle Games is going to stand for going forward. And I think, as we look at this, it reminds me of the rulebook, although these are completely different games. It reminds me of the rulebook from the Shores of Tripoli, 12 pages, so roughly about the same length and kind of a similar design and layout phase, to be a rather inviting game that isn't going to overwhelm you with rules. My guess is it's probably half an hour to an hour before you're going to be up and playing your first game, so not a heavy learning lift by any means. If I were to say, though, on complexity, on using that kind of 1 to 10 scale, I would probably go with a 3. I feel like there's enough detail in here and enough kind of strategy and tactics that you're going to be looking at that a 2 would be too low, and a 4, certainly not a 4. It's not that hard to learn and get up and playing. I will say as well, though, I feel like another place where this is going to be similar to the Shores of Tripoli is the Shores of Tripoli is a game that you can learn to play and play fairly well after a little bit, but playing really well takes a lot more time, and I feel like there's going to be that similar depth to this one here too. So we're looking at the rulebook. It's glossy, again 12 pages with a lot of images and helpful graphics to make the learning experience go smoothly. Kind of sequence of play is something probably to note here too, in that there are 6 turns, and each turn consists of 4 phases. There's a short planning phase where you kind of get your deck, your hand of cards up to full capacity at the beginning, and then a cleanup phase that's short at the end. But then the meatier parts of the turns are the strategy phase, where there's a bidding process for some powerful strategy cards, and there are 5 decks of cards in the game that we'll take a look at. And then the operations phase is where you're playing your cards, really trying to kind of influence the layout of the geographical and political landscape in the United States and swing it to your favor. And you win as the suffragist if you can get 36 states to, in your camp for pro-suffrage, and you lose if you get 13 states that have decided to go opposition. And again, that represents the three-quarter majority that you would need as either the suffragist or to prevent the three-quarter majority if you are the working as the opposition to suffrage. So that's pretty much it, I think, in terms of the rule book there. Now, this is the historical supplement and designer's notes. And I will say one of the things, having looked through this, and I think we'll see evident in this box, and this is from in the real world, I work in the educational sphere, so I am super excited about this for a couple of reasons. I feel like the game has really leaned into its educational element in terms of bringing about a learning, both a play and a learning experience about women's suffrage. And one of the things that came to mind as I was looking through this yesterday when it arrived is it feels like a museum in a box. There's just so many historical artifacts and elements of historical knowledge that are interwoven in the gameplay that I think if you are an educator, I think there's tremendous potential to bring this into the classroom. We saw this as well with the Shores of Tripoli, but I think it's apparent too that votes for women and women's suffrage has a much broader target appeal than the First Barbary War. You know, that's a rather niche interest here, but women's suffrage has tremendous educational potential. So I think there's going to be tons of fun to be able to bring this into classrooms. And here we have kind of designer's notes, a designer's letter about it, and then we have the patriarchy and the Declaration of Sentiments. So this is roughly some historical background to the game. And then historical documents timeline. This is a cool element. This is basically some background information on the various historical artifacts that are included in the box. And we'll take a look at those momentarily. There are a lot of them. And then we have some credits here as well. So a little bit of a document here kind of setting the historical stage and kind of some designer overview for the game. Now, we've got lots of pieces. We have 5 decks of cards to look through, and we've got a lot of different pieces here. We have dice. And the dice, again, there's going to be some dice chucking in the game as you're determining the political landscape of the country. We've got some 4-sided dice here. Not 4-sided, but dice that are 12-sided dice that have results of a 1 to 4. We've got some 8-sided dice, a bunch of those, and a bunch of 6-sided dice as well. I don't think I missed any in there. And so that gives us a rough idea of some of the dice chucking that's going to be in the game. So let's take a look at some of the pieces in the game. There's a lot of little bits and pieces to look at. So if we dump out the larger bag here, we can see that we have a number of cubes, 3 bags full of cubes right here. And I just kind of, the overall color palette, I love it. The purple, the gold, the green, the orange, the red. It's just a very colorful game. We got some white in here as well. 3 sets of cubes. These 2, I believe, are pro-suffrage, and then the red, I think, is the opposition. These are the cubes you're actually going to be placing on the individual states to indicate their current level of support or opposition to suffrage. And I believe you need 4 on each state, 4 on a state to gather that politically, but again, I haven't really spent too much time with the rules, so don't quote me on that. Then we have the green check marks here are used when you've acquired a state for pro-suffrage. They're going to be with you. And then the red X's means these states have gone to the opposition. And again, you need 36, 3/4 of the United States that have checks on them to win. And then you need 13 if you're the opposition to prevent suffrage from happening. Then we have a number of individuals. These are your campaigners. The women are pro-suffrage, and then the males are anti-suffrage here. And you're going to be putting these into the different regions on the map. The United States is carved up into 8 regions of 6 states each, which gets you to the 48 states that were at the time of suffrage, because, of course, Hawaii and Alaska not part of the game here. So you're going to be using these different activists and campaigners as your kind of indicator where you're placing some influence, and that dictates where, again, you're going to be getting some of this support or anti-suffrage support in the various states too. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of complexity and strategy in terms of regionally where you're going to spend some influence and where you're going to try to emphasize your movement at certain points in the game. Now, these white cylinders here go on the congressional level of support. So there's a national level of support for suffrage that's woven into the game as well. So again, as kind of I think we think about this. There's a lot of different strategies for a game that you're going to learn in a half an hour to 45 minutes and play in about an hour. There's going to be a lot of different strategies, I think, that you can take as to whether you're, to what degree you're going to be emphasizing the national level, where you're going to be emphasizing it regionally, how you're going to be working in some of the different cards. So I think there's a lot of richness to play that's going to be here to explore. Again, the type of game that I think you're going to be playing multiple times and learning something each time you play. Now, this is the part, I think, that's just, again, talking about that museum in a box. We come now to, these are the historical artifacts, and there are a lot of them. Each one of them is explained again in that historical supplement, but there's 3, 4, 5, 6, there's got to be about 10 of them here, maybe a dozen or so, and they're so full color, just really nice, kind of a very kind of a stylistic paper here too. This one, actually, I'll show some close-ups on these. So these are various pro-suffrage or anti-suffrage historical artifacts to kind of get you into the historical mood, if you would, of the United States at this time in history, and what were some of the influences and some of the causes that were woven throughout the suffrage movement that had an impact on how the game played out and how this played out historically. Interestingly enough, this one comes from Wollaston, Mass, which is about a mile away from where I grew up. And this is a kind of a little note here to the Department of Immigration, written by some guy, Wright, complaining about an English suffragist who had come to the United States trying to raise funds, I think. And again, I might be a little bit foggy on this, but it was Mrs. Parkhurst, and there was some kind of kickback against her. And so this is a document about that action and thing and how it played out. And we get them here. Most of them are one-sided. Some of them aren't. Here we have the anti-slavery bugle, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but slavery and racism played an element, of course, in the suffrage movement. So this is woven into the game too. This is not a game that softens any blows. It really explores the history around this time. So kudos for bringing this in and weaving it into the gameplay as well. This is a kind of I think it's a composition, if you would, of articles from the New York Times. But you get the idea. We just kind of go through. Here's some advocacy for the League of Women Voters. That's great to see that in here too. We get a ballot for women's suffrage here. And we get through, but just so much. And I could see if you're an educator, you could be bringing these different artifacts into the classroom and talking about how do they show up in the gameplay? How are they reflected in the history of this time? We get the joint resolution from the United States Congress, 66th Congress of the United States of America, proposing an amendment to the Constitution, extending the right of suffrage to women. We get Equal Franchise Society. So there are a lot here. Look at them all. I mean, there's so much stuff. None of this has to be here, too, which I think is really cool. Get a Spanish pro-suffrage literature piece here as well. This is just such cool stuff. I mean, there's so many artifacts in here, each one of which you could spend, I think, a good bit of time. And especially if you're playing it with your kids or something like that, you can talk about these different artifacts and the history and the marriage of history and gameplay in this, I think, has spectacular. Again, I haven't played the game yet, but it's just really enticing to see this, because I think one of the things that excites me about this, if we have good gameplay as well as good history and education woven in, that's really a winner in my book here. So, sorry, I kind of effuse over this and I'm going off on some tangents here, but let's take a look at the different card decks. So there are 5 different decks in the game. 3, I think, are going to be pretty apparent here, but the cards, again, really high production. Feels like a kind of a vinyl kind of finish here, and very durable. It looks like they're going to last a long time. Might be tempted to sleeve them because I think they're going to get a lot of play, but they're very high quality cards here. And I'll show some close-ups on some of these off to the side. There's a couple things that I think could be mentioned for them. So these are going to be the cards that you're playing in the operational stage of the game. And there are stages to each deck. So we can see early cards here and then late. And so depending upon which of the turns in the game you're in, you're going to be kind of drawing cards from different points in this deck. So there's going to be a different element. So a lot of early cards in here, the middle, and then late. So you're going to be using different cards at different stages of the game. But kind of one of the cool things here, down the bottom of each card, again, talking about that historical emphasis, we have historical quotes and some background on the name of the card and its role in history and how it played out in the women's suffrage movement. So just really kind of a cool, you get the image at the top and then the historical snippet down the bottom, and then you've got the card and its impact on gameplay in the middle there. So again, that marriage of gameplay and history just really evident in here. Just a really exciting design, I think, again, from a gameplay and historical perspective. So lots of different cards. And I could see each one of these cards almost being a conversation in its own from just an educational and a learning perspective. The Young Woman Citizen was the artifact that exists in the game. So a lot of interweaving between those historical artifacts and the cards as well. Very cool. So these are the pro-suffrage cards right here, and there's a big deck of those. I'll put those off to the side. Let's take a look at the opposition cards here too. So we have... this is opposition cards. Now, I might have this wrong, but I think the opposition cards are if a human player is playing the anti-suffrage movement. And again, the same type of thing. There's a couple of start cards that we'll see here. We have the early cards, and again, these all labeled no, so this is kind of voting no for women's suffrage. Southern hospitality, beer brewers. I'll show a couple of these off to the side again, but each one of these cards, again, its own little mini history lesson with the historical fact down the bottom. So just so much to learn and kind of experience as you're playing through this game. So again, we have those. So these are for the human player if you're playing the opposition to suffrage. Let's find in here as well. We'll talk about the states one in a moment. These are the strategy cards. We'll talk about those in a moment. Here are the Oppobot cards. So this is if you're playing solitaire or playing two-player cooperatively against the AI. These are the cards. And again, similar elements to the the opposition cards. We've got, the artifacts, and some of these I think probably overlap in terms of events and things like that. But this is the anti-suffrage. We've got a historical artifact down the bottom, and then its impact on gameplay in the middle. And I'll show a couple of examples off to the side here too. White supremacy and the suffrage movement. So again, weaving in the elements of slavery, racism in the United States that existed and influenced the suffrage vote and were part of the strategy for and against women's suffrage at the time too. So this is the deck for those, and these are big, hefty decks, all really good quality cards again. Now we have two other elements of play that are worth mentioning in terms of cards here. So we have states cards. There aren't so many of these. I think there's a dozen or so of these, and I think these are particular cards that you can get if you win that state. So if you're pro-suffrage and you get the state, you're going to, if you win Montana, you get, for example, 2 of these buttons, which impact gameplay. And then if you're the Oppobot, you add 3 blocks to 2 states determined at random. So if you win a particular kind of bellwether states, I think these probably represent, you're going to get some bonuses to this. So not all states are created equal in this game. And there's a few here that you're going to be targeting in each region as being a little bit, giving you a little bit more bonuses than other states in the game. So there's probably about a dozen of those, maybe 16 or so, 2 for each region. Might be there. And then we have the strategy cards. This comes up in that strategy phase where you're going to be bidding against the Oppobot or bidding, pro-suffer, you're going to be bidding against each other to try to bring one of these cards into your side. And these cards give you particular benefits as to gameplay. So for example, again, historical facts down the bottom, but this one here, change of plans is look at your opponent's hand. Your opponent must discard 1 card of your choice that does not have one of these campaigners on it. Your opponent then draws 1 replacement card from the draw deck. Do not use versus the Oppobot, so you take it out of the game in that case. So again, these cards are bidding for, you're going to determine how much influence you're going to spend to try to get one of these cards into play, but again, an element of that strategy that's woven into the game. Now these were 2 extra cards that came with outside of the box. I think maybe these were Kickstarter ones or something. Board Games for Suffrage is a promo card. These are extra cards I think that aren't necessarily in the standard game, 1 for the suffragist and 1 for the opposition that you bring into play here. So those I think are similar to all the other cards, but just not included in the base game as well. A couple things left to look at. We got to look at the map and then these buttons. Let me get these out. All right, so we have here a set of 16 buttons. And these are kind of tokens that you can use for various elements. Like there's a lot of different ways I think you can use these buttons in the game to help or your cause. They can be used, I think they're used for bidding as well for those strategy cards at the beginning of the turn, but you can undo things and redo things and kind of play them a bunch of different ways. So gaining these and spending these judiciously, I think is one thing that happens as you play through the game to influence the outcome of the game to your favor. And now we have finally the map. Now this is a 17 by 22 map. I'll show a zoomed out version of this as I unfold it here. But really like the art style, really clear, easy to see, easy to play. And I can get probably pretty much all of this here on the camera as we look at it too. Again, we can see the U.S. divided up into different, the United States divided up. Sorry, I think I said 8. Yeah, I said 8 regions. There are 6 regions of 8 states. So my bad. I'm correcting myself on that. So we can see West, Plains, South, Midwest, Atlantic and Appalachia, and the Northeast region here. And these again are going to be where you're going to be playing those cubes to try to win the states. And as you play out the game, you're going to see green check marks and red X's starting to appear on the game here. And as soon as you achieve victory conditions, it's game over. And then there's a final voting if you reach the end of the 6th turn and neither side has kind of reached a determined state here of victory. So really kind of good. There's a thick, nice, kind of very high quality mat. Looks, mounted map here in terms of gameplay. So it looks like it's going to be pretty durable and just a really nice kind of simple yet elegant design to kind of pull you into the history and the gameplay. There you have it. Everything there is to see in the box of Votes for Women. Very excited. I'll be bringing this one to the channel. It's a review copy, so I'm going to be bringing it to the channel as soon as I can. I'm looking forward to trying it in a lot of different ways. And again, if it's, I don't want to say too much about the gameplay until I've had a chance to play it. Really excited to dig in. And if it's anything is kind of in that similar vein to the Shores of Tripoli, I think this looks like it's going to be a game that's going to get to my table quite often as we go forward. Happy to entertain any questions that I might be able to answer as we go through this, but thanks everybody for watching. I'll put a link here to some gameplay videos as soon as they are out. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.